started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lorraine Maher. For those of you that have tuned in before, you'll know who I am. But for anybody who's new this evening, I just want to start by saying that I'm an artist in resident at Access in Ballymun. Delighted to be there. And through my residency, I'm doing a residency that is supported by Arts Council Ireland, which I'm really excited about. And throughout my residency, I'm exploring the social and cultural implications of othering in the arts, and in the hope to create a dialogue about access, inclusion, and representation. So in lots of ways, these weekly conversations are like giving you an opportunity to have a bird's eye view into some of the discussions that I might have if I'm thinking about my creativity or trying to create a piece of work, or just thinking more broadly about the work that I do as an artist. And so these conversations are an opportunity to touch base with other creatives that I really respect. These conversations are really relaxed. You know, we're in our house, and this is an opportunity for you to see maybe some of the conversations that we would have when we're just in our house, or kind of the behind the scenes conversations. So I am going to introduce my guest tonight. I'm really excited to have this person here. This person is somebody who I really respect, who is a credit to Ireland, and a phenomenal force of creativity. So I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you for that ringing endorsement, Lorraine. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on the show as well, to be part of this project. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I'm so glad you said it's relaxed, because as you will hear, I'm not alone. And I live in like an open plan flat, and so there's no walls, and so my baby is still awake, and he's pretty vocal, so yeah, there might be some
yeah, but you know what, that's real life. And you know, we're mothers, we've got children, and they're often part of the process. And I think as women, I think that that's something that actually is a gift just from the off, because we are often working parents, and that means sometimes we're creating while we're cooking, while we're ironing, while we're doing the bedtime routine. Well, I'm a nan now, on top of all of the mothering. I'm a nan and still doing all of those kind of things. So this is real, and baby is welcome. Baby is welcome. We're loving the babies.
Thank you.
Emma, I'm gonna just kick off. So I know that a lot of the work that you do is based on race, and we know that, you know, you talk very eloquently and represent when we're talking about race in Ireland. But I'm not going to go down that road tonight, because I think that if people want to hear that from you, there's loads of resources out there and loads of opportunities for people to touch base with that. Mm-hmm. But I am going to ask you about yourself as a creative, and what that, you know, how you identify with all of that when you think about who you are as an Irish person.
Yeah, so I guess my work sits across like lots of different, like, I guess I'm in lots of different kind of industries as well. So, like, I mean, I teach at a university, but I teach African studies, which is, I guess it's a degree that is maybe like what an arts degree is like, you know, but everything is African or African diaspora. So it's all like cultural production, everything that I teach. Well, most of what I teach is about cultural production. So be that kind of like indigenous arts, post-colonial arts, literature, theater, different like spiritual belief systems, but most African spiritual belief systems have music, song, and dance as really integral parts of the expression of those cosmologies and the kind of ritual behavior that's part of the belief systems as well. So that's what I teach. Then I'm doing a PhD myself, which I'm almost finished. thank the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's in sociology, but it's visual sociology. So I'm doing that at Goldsmiths, which is, I think, probably best known as like an art college. So even though I'm doing sociology, it's practice-based, and I'm working on like a soundscape that is part of my that will accompany the written thesis, and the written thesis is slightly shorter than a typical PhD one would be. And then obviously not obviously, but I am an author as well. I wrote my debut book, Don't Touch My Hair, which came out in, when did it come out? 2019. This year I've lost all like concept of time, as I'm sure many of us like can relate to. But yeah, that came out last year. The paperback came out this year, just at the start of the lockdown. I'm working on another book.
One.
Yeah, it's actually, it's a short book. It's like an extended essay kind of length. But that will be, and I think maybe I can talk about, I don't know, it'll be announced anyway in the next couple of days.
Okay.
So I'm working on that, and I also present TV shows. So I'm working on a couple of different things at the moment, and I'm sure there's something else that I do. Oh yeah, and then I do other freelance work. So for instance, what would be relevant to this conversation, I'm working at the South London Gallery, which is a gallery in Peckham in South London, and it is basically the project that I'm working on. It's like a researcher in residence project, which I'm sharing the role with somebody else. We're splitting it because I have so many other demands and the baby and everything, but we are looking at there's the baby. We're looking at a colonial archive of this guy called Thomas Northcote, who was he was like the official anthropologist that the British sent to Nigeria in the early stages of the colonization of Nigeria. So he has this huge archive of photography and film and music recordings as well, actually. So we're working with a group of young people to help them like reimagine the archive.
That's really exciting. And can I just ask you, when you think about your career and all the different things that you do you, because I'm just starting to speak about the work I do as having a portfolio career. This feels like it's like new lingo that that's kind of feels outside of me. But do you think that the work that you do in your career, would you describe it in that way?
I actually struggle to describe it, but I think I'm going to use the portfolio now. I have heard that before, but I hadn't really thought about it. But yeah, I guess that would be a good way of me summarizing it, because I kind of dread when people ask me what do you do, because I'm just like, oh God, have you got all night? So sometimes I'll just say, oh, I'm a PhD student, and just kind of leave it at that. Another one I've heard is multi-hyphenate. So yeah, that's another phrase I've heard for people that do lots of different.
That feels a bit kind of wordy. Even when I thought about portfolio career, I was like, oh my God. But it is hard, because, and I also sometimes think like if I say, I'm a director, curator, producer, trainer, but it feels like, oh my God, you're jack of all trades, but and that's not so. It just happens to be a situation where I'm interested in a lot of things, but actually they all feel like the same thing to me. So part of even the work that I'm doing at Access is about me trying to understand who I am as a creative. And one of the things that I've come to think is that my creativity is about people. And so all of the other things are just connected to people, and how I platform or how I communicate that or how I show that. And actually it's probably not just about people, it's about people who are often not seen. And that is not because it's not happening, because often it's really happening. We just, people don't always have access in that kind of way, or are not platformed, are not seen as being mainstream. And so like when I hear about all of the amazing things that you have a wealth of knowledge. But when you do have, now I'm going to step back a bit, when you were growing up in Ireland, did you see yourself as a creative? And did you ever think at that time about, you know, how you would connect to that in an Irish context?
I mean, I was always told that I would like amount to nothing. That was very much the message from my schools.
Look at you now.
These different
Now
schools.
it's kind of like you want to wave that banner. Well, I do anyway.
But like, you know, I always loved reading. Like reading was really my refuge, and I wanted to write fiction, but I had no, that was actually the one, English was the one, I didn't even like, because I went to so many different schools. I had lots of different teachers, but I had like one English teacher in particular, but I only had her for a year, who kind of stands out as probably like one of the only good teachers that I had. And we've recently gotten back in touch, which has been really nice. But yeah, English and history actually. But I felt that I would love to have been a writer, and I would get, it was mixed. It was depending on the teacher. Like sometimes with my kind of short stories or fiction writing, I'd be really, really discouraged. And I actually wrote quite a lot of, I read a lot of Black history, like as a young person, and that would inform the stories that I'd write. And the responses from my teachers, like sometimes would be really negative. Like I remember writing a story about like the abolition of the slave trade and getting like, almost getting in trouble and getting like a bad mark and being told that that it was very far-fetched. I had a very overactive imagination, and I was like, well, is that not the nature of fiction? But I wanted to be a writer, but I couldn't conceive of, I wouldn't have known the steps to go through to access that, and I wouldn't have really have had the confidence to believe that I could do it successfully either. And even then when I left Ireland and came to university here and I studied African literature, most of the writers were male, and there was one or two women writers that were on our course, but most were men. And while reading their work was very like expansive and really important for me, I still didn't necessarily, even reading that work, I still didn't feel like necessarily like I could be a writer, you know. And even with doing eventually going on to like do my PhD and it being in sociology, like I really wish, well, I mean, everything happens for a reason, so it's grand. But were I to start again, I would probably do it in creative writing. But I was too, you know, I was still just too scared. So I think what I want to do next after the book that I'm writing on, working on at the moment, is try and, well, not even try, is to write fiction. So that's going to be my next challenge, because I think that's what I've always wanted to do, but for various reasons didn't have the confidence, didn't have the self-belief. Then by the time I did, I didn't have the time. So yeah, sorry, kind of a meandering answer.
No, but I mean, that feels really exciting. And I think that there's something really interesting in that, because it is about not knowing the steps. And sometimes it's that, like I talk a lot about never actually, even up to now, I'm still questioning whether I'm an artist or I'm not, whether I'm a creative or I'm not, because growing up, you couldn't earn a living from being an artist or being a creative. And a lot of that came from a class system, because those that were perceived to be of a middle class, or whatever you'd call that within Ireland, they were the people that were in the theatre, but the theatre world was so far removed from anything that I conceived. Even thinking about when you look at visual arts, that was for the gifted. That wasn't just for someone to try. And I even thinking, Emma, about what my family might have said had I said when I was a child that I'm going to write a book. I can imagine that they probably would have laughed at me, even though I loved to write. You know, I loved to write, and do in secret, actually, because that for me is part of my processing. You know, before I go to bed, journaling, and often just writing in a creative way, but never actually really shown it because it was always just my thing, but never kind of seen as something that you could do. And I think that there's a real gift in even thinking that for organizations that are really thinking about representation and inclusion, a lot of that is about growing your own, and it is about giving people those opportunities and teaching people those kind of steps to connect. So I'm just going to ask you, like, when you're thinking about Irish arts and culture, if someone asked you to describe Irish arts and culture, how would you describe it?
Oh, wow. I would say like rich and with a long history. And I mean, like Ireland has a really rich literary history. And I think it's a country, it's a culture where there is a great enjoyment of and respect for words, you know. So I actually, oh my gosh. Would you mind? I'm just, his dad's gonna pick him up hopefully, and then he will or he's gonna get some water and then he will stop screaming. I think he's screaming for water.
He's been creative, Emma. He's been creative. I think I've learned baby language now over the years. You kind of know the different tones.
Right. So, okay, I'm back. Yeah, so I feel that, like, oh my gosh, I feel that my love of language, which I do have, is something that is not you know, oh, I think I might actually have to go outside. Hang on, sorry, give me one moment. Sorry.
You're fine, Emma, you're fine. I think it's a good point for us to just kind of note what life is often like for working parents, that particularly those that are in the arts, because sometimes when we're working in the arts, you have to work what is deemed to be on social hours. Emma, I was just saying that this is often kind of what life is like when you're working, particularly in the arts, because we often work on social hours and have to manage life.
Yeah, so this is usually when I do Zooms in the evening. If I don't do them in the day, usually if I do them in the evening, I do them later. I usually ask if we can do them at 9 or 10, but I just completely forgot. I was just like, oh yeah, $8,000. And then I was just like, that's close to like the bedtime hour. Will there be? Unfortunately, there's been a crossover, but it's grand. I was saying the arts in Ireland. Yeah. So I would say, yeah, as a writer, I have definitely been, you know, inspired and deeply like influenced, I think, you know, by my Irishness and growing up somewhere that has this like really literary tradition, but also, you know, just like a love of, or a long history of like orality as well. So just, yeah, like a respect for words, be they spoken or written. And I often, like, one of the things I really miss about not living in Ireland is just the quality of conversation with Irish people. Like, it just feels like different to how it feels really in most of the parts of the world that I've been to. But beyond that, I would say I probably growing up would have felt quite removed from the formal arts, you know. I grew up like knowing like a lot of kind of folk music and like traditional music and stuff, but that seemed more like informal, just kind of like what my mum was into. But what was I just thinking about, like kind of Irish theatre or like visual arts or those kind of more formal things, I wouldn't have really felt that much of a connection, I guess, you know. It's kind of something that I feel like I've kind of reconnected to in later life, if that makes sense. But like, I mean, when I was growing up in Ireland, I didn't really feel that connected to a lot of Irish culture, you know, beyond the arts even. But interestingly, it was when I left Ireland that I came to really actually understand how Irish I was. I think like I hadn't understood that when I was living there. And I guess when I had kind of like this inclusivity into Irishness often kind of denied to me, not just in terms of like a certain industry or sector, but like kind of more like across the board, you know. But then despite that, like, I am Irish. I was born there. I spent like my formative years there, and my education for better or worse there. So yeah, it has really like informed me, and I feel like I just didn't know the extent of that influence until I left.
And I think it's important to say you're ancestrally Irish. I mean, I think it's really important that we continually say that, because, you know, part of the thing that drew me to this, to wanting to explore in this way, to explore othering, came from thinking about the Irish census and the fact that we're kind of not recognized. So, you know, you can be Black, you can be white, you can be Asian, you can be other. And that kind of constant frustration of the othering, but also the census globally, meaning that Irish equals white. And so, you know, there's so many conversations about that at the moment, but I think, you know, one of the I suppose the staples of I Am Irish is an ancestral Irish root. And it's important that we continually talk about that. And that is not about ignoring the other sides of us, but we are ancestrally Irish. But I'm coming back to what we were just talking about now. But I think it would be a lost moment to not have a conversation about motherhood and the arts, because it's just so real. No, but it's just so real. And when we think about, even when we're thinking about othering and we're thinking about the arts, you know, you even spoke yourself about, you know, being in the UK and it being very male centric. And when I'm just thinking about, like, I'm listening to you at your Baba, and it just really brings me back. Like, I remember going to work and literally having my child strapped on me while I was setting up for things. And my kids have grown up in that space. Like, they've grown up in studio spaces, and it's been great. It's been amazing. But actually, you know, when we're thinking about arts and culture, and we're thinking about how we can create really inclusive spaces, then there is something in that about thinking about programming, you know, what the needs are in order to ensure that we have full representation. What's your thoughts around that, Emma?
Yeah, I do feel that often he's really screaming there.
Does he want you? Do you need to go?
No, I think he's just getting washed, and he's
resistant.
Exactly. But I think I often think, like, unless you're like a parent yourself, then you just have no, and maybe particularly a mother, but at least a parent, you just really have kind of no idea about the about what it's like, and you know kind of how all encompassing it is. So trying to like juggle work with also like mothering can be like very challenging in many ways. Like for me personally, I've actually become like a lot more like focused and productive since I had children. So it's not always that it kind of stops you. It's not always that it stops you working or anything like that. And it's certainly not always negative or even negative, but it definitely comes like with its own challenges. And I think it's just about being you know, there being an awareness of that. And I think like if it's possible to have spaces where they are like child friendly, you can bring your child with you, or there can be some sort of childcare, you know, kind of offered or helped with, I think is something that really needs to, that is really important. And I think if you have kind of men or people without children as the only people kind of making those decisions, they might not necessarily think about those issues and those constraints. But I know, like, certainly even the project I was telling you about in the South London Gallery, the first kind of session I did with the young people, I had to bring the baby with me, and they were like very supportive and accommodating, but it was still stressful for me because, you know, he was like literally strapped to me, and he slept for the first hour, so that was grand, but like he woke up in the second hour, and that was, you know, it's quite fraught. So I've definitely had some experiences where, you know, you're there with the baby as you were kind of describing, and it can go either way. Like if they sleep through it, that's one thing and you can get away with it, but it might be, it might be a bit fraught. So I guess, yeah, it's just kind of knowing about I think I've made my point.
Yeah, but you know, that for me also, when I'm thinking about being Irish and being in Ireland, that feels like there's a kind of important distinction for me, because it feels like there's much more respect for children and young people in Ireland in general. You know, people are a bit more inclusive when they're thinking about children, or just how how children are perceived. Like I remember actually working in Access 2017, I think it was, and there was a dance group there there was a collection of abilities within the room. And I remember working with a group of young women who were on like a training program, and they really wanted to introduce me to this young woman who was an incredible dancer. And I just thought, like, those same groups of individuals in the UK, I don't think that the same generosity and kindness would have been there. And they just saw each other in a way that they just literally wanted to, you know, they wanted to show off the dance skills of this young person. In a way that it was really warming to me, because I work in arts and criminal justice and often see what that looks like here. And also just the way that people interact with babies in London, to the way that they interact with babies in Ireland, it just feels really different. And yeah, I think that's something I really love about being home, just kind of, you know, but I think that for a lot of young people, they will often say that things change when they start secondary school in Ireland. They're seen very differently, particularly if we're looking at young people who identify as being Black or brown. But I'm not going to go down there. What I would like to ask you though about is, when you are in Ireland, have you been? No, I'm going to ask you about kind of mainstream. What you see is mainstream and what's not mainstream, because often I hear people saying that creativity in Ireland it looks a particular way. But actually, I've experienced lots of different things when I've been in Ireland, and there feels like there's like an underground culture, and often the quality, there's this really high quality, really well put together, really well delivered, but it's still not seen in the mainstream. Have you had that experience?
So I'm just trying to think best how to answer this. So for me, I've always been interested in subcultures and in kind of more underground movements anyway. And I've seen things that have, you know, very thriving and incredibly innovative like cultures like around them, different like forms of cultural production that a mainstreaming of would probably, you know, sanitize and distort and kind of, you know, often when something becomes mainstream, it becomes kind of anodyne in a way. So for me, I like subcultures. I like the underground, you know. So I'm not talking in terms of, I don't know. And I feel like in the past, if I think about certain like genres of music or scenes that I've been into, they had their own alternative institutions as well, you know. So there were, you know, like there was pirate radio. There were alternative institutions where you could still actually, you know, like have a livelihood. You could still have a livelihood in this kind of alternative space. And I think a lot of those autonomous and more alternative spaces have actually kind of gone. And if you're not in the mainstream, there's not like an alternative ecosystem necessarily that you can survive in. So I don't know, I feel kind of like the conversation about mainstreaming, I feel like it's complicated, you know. I know you need to be able to like survive and make a living from what you're doing, but within that, I think it's important that everything isn't mainstream, you know, from where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, but I think, you know, when we're looking at funding and opportunities, that often is that they are often linked to institutions and they're linked to what's perceived to be quality. And it's like, how do we ensure that, I'm just thinking about just how, you know, I'd identify as being a working class artist, but I don't know that I always want to be introduced as a working class artist. You know, I just want to be an artist sometimes, or I just want to be the kind of creative. And I don't always want to have to like to uncover the inners of my belly in order to be able to get funding. Like, I don't always want to have to be really able, you know, to look at all these kind of challenges. What is it that you're doing? And actually, often even for arts organizations and arts projects that are doing incredible work, once they get those projects off the ground, then they're not innovative enough to get repeat funding. You kind of constantly have to go through these what feels like you're going through an assault course sometimes in order for your work to be recognized in that kind of way. And I'm just wondering what we can do, or how we can kind of quality mark that work and the work of individuals that don't want to be part of institutions, but to also ensure that they still get the same kind of media attention, that they still get the same funding, and that they still, you know, because like when we think about the mainstream, we think about the kite mark, or, you know, when people go to uni and they hear about all the theatre, all the theories that there are, or, you know, like whether, I was just going to mention some, and I'm not going to go down there, or even when you think about the genres, it's almost like one is given more of I can't even think of my words this evening, Emma, but it's like one is put on a higher pedestal than the others. And I'm just thinking about equity.
Between what? When something's put on a higher pedestal, sorry, what are the...
So like when we're looking at say someone who's creating their own kind of work that is not seen as mainstream versus work that is seen as traditional and mainstream, it's like, who gives it that kite mark? Because like when I was listening to you talking earlier on, and you were talking about like African music, African culture, and when you see how rich that is, but actually put in another space, the listeners may not appreciate it in the same kind of way. And so therefore, that often is not given the same airplay, that's often not given the same access to, you know, in terms of audiences, and not given the same kind of support. because
Okay.
because
Yeah,
the value system is different.
I see what you mean. I think I was kind of understanding mainstream like it in a different way. Okay. So I would like there to be a world though where also things that are alternative can exist, but they still have access to the same resources that something that is seen as more mainstream or more populist would have. I don't think something being alternative should be a criteria for it to be kind of under-resourced or underfunded, you know? How that can happen. Well, I don't know though. It's interesting because sometimes there are things that, like, have a lot of commercial success, but they're not seen as, they wouldn't be seen as artistic. And then there are things that are quite embraced by the arts, but they don't really have the same crossover commercial success. So I think, I don't know.
No, I hear what you're saying. I do hear what you're saying. I mean, I think there's so many kind of levels to that, actually, isn't there? Because even in terms of the work in itself, because sometimes, you might see somebody who writes a script and is brought to 6 or 7 different places to see, to get feedback. And people tell them it's no good, but actually they might put that same play on themselves and they got a sold out show, because actually the people that resonate with whatever that piece is are appreciating it, but yet it's still not given that kind of same gravitas, because somebody who is a maker or somebody, it's kind of that kite mark. It's like, the structural systems that say this, you are good enough, or this is good enough, which in lots of ways leads to elitism. When we see like drama schools or whatever, people go to a particular drama school because they use this kind of theory, it's taught by this person, and there's just so much elitism in it that often what happens is it churns out the same kinds of people. And I say that because they look different colors, they have different voices, but actually they're the same people. They're bringing the same thing to the table. And all of the richness and rawness sometimes that they have is just diluted within all of that, because yeah,
completely. I think that's a really interesting point that you've made lots of interesting points, but I'll come back to that one first. Like you were saying, they may be different colors, they may have different voices, but they're the same kind of person. You do really see that. Like, so I think, like, with this idea of diversity, it's like, oh, we'll just get people of like different races and that will be diversity. But we need actually a diversity of ideas, and you don't necessarily just, like, if you've kind of gone through the same institutions as somebody else, even if your skin is like a different complexion, you still kind of often been trained to think in the same way, or and I think class is like a really like a really big kind of issue there. And you mentioned like elitism, and I do think like within the arts, that is like a huge that's a huge issue. And it's not only I think it's also got to do something that I never really understood before, when I never knew if I wanted to be a writer, like, I didn't know how to do it. And I came to understand like much later that like the power of networks, like people, their families and their friends and the people that they socialize with and their social worlds really will be like connected in certain industries. So those people's like children can very easily access those things for a young age. So if they want to be a writer, they know the steps, they know exactly what it is that you need to do, and they know the right people. And I think the power of those networks is I guess one of those things of like soft power, that even if you go to university, if you don't you might make those connections there, but there'll be other people that have those connections from their families, from the schools that they went to, and they have such an advantage. And it's really difficult to kind of like catch up with that. And I know that's why like a lot of organizations, like newspapers, various other organizations, have stopped doing work experience where it's just like you recommend a friend or a family member, and everyone has to actually apply, you know, so it's kind of more, it's so to create, I guess, more fairness. But I mean, there's such a long way to go, but I do think at least now there is a recognition of the fact that many people do not have access to those networks, and that is like very disadvantageous in these industries.
I have to agree with you, and I think that just even to add to that, you know, we know that the arts often is about that. It is about who you know, and even when we were going through this application process, even sometimes, you know, people think that there's a diversity in terms of offering opportunities for access, because now you can send a video as opposed to writing something. But people feel compelled to do these really fancy videos rather than just be able to talk, because there's often, and I've been privy to it so much, Emma, where I've been in a room full of people talking a language that no one understands, you know, words that nobody knows what the word means, and everyone's afraid to say, I don't know what that means. And, you know, and so we're perpetuating all of these same things. And so, you know, for me, when I'm thinking even about creating those spaces, like when we're thinking about, because class is a massive part of all of this, a massive part. Even when when you look at, we're both in London, you look at inner city London, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter what religion you are. When you live in a particular space, then already you're disadvantaged. You're disadvantaged in terms of the schools that you can go to. You're disadvantaged about, you know, I mean, the list kind of goes on.
Yeah. And also I find in London as well, increasingly, you know, there's so much inequality that it's not only that there's like poverty in certain boroughs, but there's like poverty right next to obscene wealth. So it's also like the dynamic that creates, you know.
Yeah, constantly. Look, I live in one of those areas myself, so I see that like literally every day. And I think just in terms of like a model of good practice, because I worked at the Roundhouse for 10 years, and actually it was one of the only places that I'd ever been to where you saw those young people come together in that kind of way to just create incredible work, because it was really about what those young people brought to the table, and they were allowed to create the way. And I think that, you know, again, going back to what we're talking about creating opportunities for people to have experience, it's sometimes about being able to think outside of the box, because the reality is that people that come from low socioeconomic backgrounds can't afford to volunteer. They just don't have the time or the space to do that. Even, you know, we talked about children, we talked about childcare. People just don't have access to that. So if we're looking for a diversity within our spaces, we have to be able to think about the bigger picture. But one thing that I'm really mindful of, so like at the Access Arts in Ballymun, they're really good actually at really supporting people to develop. But I know that in terms of the representation of where Access is in the north side of Dublin, they're quite good in having a diversity of white artists, but there is not. Well, and I'm just saying it as it is, Emma.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it is. But and it's not that the space is not set up in a way that is welcoming, and in a way that is that really wants to elevate and wants to support, because all of that is in place, and is an organization that is doing everything that it can to ensure that their platform and voices, you know, like I'm just thinking about some of the work that's been shown there way beyond the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, they were having these conversations years ago, and still when they advertise, you know, amazing bursary places, they're not being picked up. People are just not applying. And, you know, and I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in what that's about, because it, you know,
that's me too. Like I've also like spoken to people, you know, who have done who kind of put out like ads saying that they're looking to commission or to take on board to kind of mentor people from particular backgrounds, and then they don't get any responses from the people that they're kind of looking to try and reach out to. And again, I think like it's kind of networks, you know. Often I think the people that need to hear about those opportunities just aren't. I think we often operate in quite atomized, and increasingly the way we organize, I think in this day and age around, I think a lot of it's to do with social media and various different things, but we're quite splintered, and I think groups are quite atomized. So you have your own kind of echo chambers, and often I think there seems to be like a lack of knowledge as to how to break out of them and to make connections between people that and to make connections between people, which is kind of sounds counterintuitive, because you would think with kind of the digital technology and revolution essentially that we've had, it allows you to create those connections with people you would not have previously had access to. But it seems that there are actually, yes, challenges in doing that, and we do often kind of operate in these ecosystems. And again, I think it's also sometimes people think that, like, you know, those spaces just aren't for them, and you don't even like conceive of kind of being in those spaces, because you're just like, oh no, that's not for me. Like I remember being like that, you know.
Me
just
too.
Like, so I guess it's like addressing that issue as well, making, like, through public engagement, through different initiatives, making those spaces feel like they are inclusive spaces, that a whole breadth and range of people have the right to be in, you know.
And actually, I will take my hat off, because actually that is what Access is doing, even with these, you know, the fact that they're supporting me as an artist, and not just now, has supported my work like over the last few years, and really have been, you know, when I'm thinking about allyship and what that looks like, this is that kind of space. So I'm really hoping that anybody that is listening in tonight who really feels like that they are an artist that, you know, wants to work in a space that is really for them, that this is that space, make contact. And that's not me saying that because I happen to be on this platform. I'm on this platform because this is probably one of the few spaces that I want to be in. And that goes back to what you're saying about where you feel like you fit, where you feel like you belong. And I feel like for me, Access is definitely my Irish-based creative home. You know, that's where I want to go to work, where I feel like, you know, it is like, you know, even when I look at the space, it's, you know, it's got a theatre space, there's the studio spaces, there's a nursery, there's a community cafe. It's really all of that. I'm getting excited when I think about
that's a nursery. That is music to my ears.
Like, it's the most amazing space. When you're next home, when we can be, you know, go and meet the team there, because
I'd love to.
It will leave a mark on you. I can guarantee you'll want to go back there. It's that kind of space.
Oh, that's brilliant.
But when we're thinking about, like, I feel like that for arts organizations in Ireland, like, you know, across the board, I'm feeling like that every time I have a conversation with someone, I want to leave a gift. Like, I want to give. I mean, I think I've mentioned the word gift umpteen times tonight. And I think I'm doing it. So, you know, I've been on Zoom since like 9 o'clock this morning. I've had a variety of different meetings. But the one thing that I keep thinking about as the days going by is, you know, we have all of these, so many conversations, but unless we can think about the strategies and how we move forward and how we can actually make change, then all of those other conversations are just conversations. And so, you know, if you could speak to some of the other, you know, and maybe even like when we're thinking about some of the smaller organizations, some of the smaller creative spaces in Ireland, what would you say to them? What would be your gift to them?
Well, like most of the work that I'm doing around these kind of issues is well, I say here is in the UK, but some of the like projects that I'm involved in, so for instance, there's a Black Writers Guild that assembled at the in the last few months to address the lack of representation in publishing industry. The publishing industry is very white and very like very, it's not just white, it's very upper middle class, you know. So the Black Writers Guild exists to not only see greater representation of Black writers and authors, but also to look at the actual industry itself. And if you're in publishing, there are so few, you know, like Black commissioners, Black, any of the positions, you know, there are very few people of color. And so the Black Writers Guild are working with the main publishing houses, and they have a set of kind of demands, as it were, that we've been working with the main publishing houses with in addressing all the issues that are existing in that industry. Again, with publishing, I think Stormzy's imprint, Murky, is like phenomenal. And him and the imprint have done so much. And I'm one of the judges on the second year of the writing prize, and they're looking for young people from, you know, underrepresented backgrounds to submit work. And then the winner of that, you know, will gets like a publishing deal. And it's a really great prize. I'm like, I'll share the details. And what was I going to say? My mind's just gone blank. So yeah, so it's for young people from underrepresented backgrounds in the UK, but also in the Republic of Ireland. So I hope to see some Irish submissions in there as well. But yeah, so there are things that are starting to happen, but it's gosh, in terms of the landscape in Ireland, yeah, so I'm working with the Dublin Theatre Festival, and we're doing a panel looking at the voices of kind of young Black Irish people and issues around gatekeeping and, you know, access. So like very relevant to what we're talking about now. And I guess it's like when I guest edited the Irish Times piece, and what I wanted to do was use, like, you know, an opportunity. So I was asked to write something, and I was just like, okay, so rather than me write something, why don't I guest edit, like oversee the thing, and just let's get more voices, because we really need to access more people, and also to give more people the opportunity to showcase their writing, and to also make those connections with the Irish Times, so that, you know, what we were talking about earlier about like networks and who you know and stuff. So once people have those initial introductions, have those initial pieces published, then those connections start to be built, and that work can go on. And I know some of those, I was going to say young people, but it's not just young people, but some of those people who wrote for that special issue have gone on to, I think they're going to continue to write for the Irish Times. So it's about kind of creating, you know, that legacy, so things just aren't kind of like tokenistic. It's not just a panel, it's not just a special issue, but it's allowing people to kind of access those networks, you know, make those connections themselves, so that they can access those opportunities and build on those things. I think networks and introductions to people is really important.
I think there's so much in what you just said there that's really important. But I think going back to what I said about a gift, I think that being able to create those networks, and actually for any arts organization that is looking in, I think it'd be worth your while, just, you know, because for me it's about transparency, Emma, because there's lots of places, you know, and we've seen it in the last year, particularly, you know, since all the kind of horrendousness, we've seen people coming out to say, I want to do more, I want to, but actually, you know, in some places doing very little, or doing something in the now, And so it's kind of looking more long term at what those kind of offers are, looking at how you can develop people, and not just for the sake of, like, you know, going back to what we were saying about diversity. Diversity is not always about the color of someone's skin. It's about all of those kind of experiences. It's about being able to just bring yourself to work. Like, that's why it's so important for me, for these conversations, that it's like literally bring yourself. And if you know, bring yourself in whatever way that you are, because we're all living with so much at the moment and having to deal with so much, that often people bring a very small portion of themselves to work. And I think that within the creative industries, particularly for people who are performers, they're often going and building relationships is often really short term, because people move from job to job, they work with lots of different organizations. But I think that making those kind of connections is really important, and having those connections in your book, and actually for any creative that is listening in, I think it's important to kind of understand how small this world is. And so, you know, put your best foot forward when given an opportunity. And being given an opportunity doesn't always mean that you have to completely shine. I think that there is as much power in being able to say, I don't know what I'm doing, or I need some help, as there is in being given an opportunity and feeling like you have to shine, you know.
Yeah, I think that absolutely, but I think, you know, that can be quite challenging, especially, you know, if you're, because sometimes you're working against the perceptions that people, or, you know, I used to feel that I had to over excel at stuff to shut down I felt like, you know, because of being Black, because of being a woman, because of various different things, there are going to be people that are seeking to delegitimize what I'm saying, and be like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about, to undermine you, because they're already coming with these low expectations. So you have this need that you have to be perfect, because you can't afford to get anything wrong. You know, there's not that space for a mistake, that maybe if somebody else was to make that mistake, you feel they might be given the benefit of the doubt, but you wouldn't, you know. So I guess we have to, when people are from minority groups, you know, they're often kind of taken as a representative of the whole group. So you've got also the weight of that burden. So it's if it's an environment where you're not the only one and it's not tokenistic, I think it's going to be easier to feel that you're not there representing, you know, the entirety of your race or your gender or your kind of socioeconomic background or whatever.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, I'm talking to organizations, that it's important that organizations are creating the environment where everybody that's in that organization feels like that their voice is valid, because there is nothing worse, even when, you know, people think, oh, well, there's 2 or 3 Black people that work here, but they're all very different people. They're not, you know, because people happen to have a similar skin tone, that means nothing at all. And actually, if those 3 individuals are very alike in terms of what they bring to the table, then actually that you've done nothing at all. We've actually come to the end of this evening. Is there anything at all that we haven't covered that you feel like I really want to say that?
I'd like to discuss ancestry with you, but in the space of the 30 seconds that we have left, I don't think that's going to fit in. So that will have to be continued elsewhere, or to be continued.
To definitely be continued. And just for those of you that don't know, so Emma and I actually were both Irish and Nigerian, which, yeah, it's nice to have things in common with people. But I know very little about I can't say I know very little anymore, because I know a lot now about my Nigerian ancestry, a lot. A lot. But I'm going to leave that there. We will have that conversation, and I think it would be really good to have that conversation again at another time, actually, Emma, a kind of a public conversation, because I think that there are more and more people that are just interested, and lots of young people in Ireland that are kind of a bit removed from what their thoughts are, even about whether it's their Irish ancestry or whether it's the other side of them, whatever that ancestry is. So it's a really good kind of conversation to have.
Yeah,
But,
I welcome that.
Emma, thank you so much for giving your time this evening, not just to this, because you give so generously of yourself, just, you know, in general. But thank you all for listening in this evening. Thank you to Access Arts for giving us this platform. I will be back again next Wednesday evening. I hope that you will join me at 8 o'clock. But for now, enjoy the rest of your week. Emma, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Wonderful. See you.